Every life science company is hungry to find and absorb industry best practice. And for good reason. The business environment is changing quickly, so no firm can afford to be left behind, and relying on only what you can learn yourself from your own experience isn't enough. So innovation is important, but so is imitation. But as any experienced business leader will tell you, assimilating the processes and methods from other firms, even apparently excellent ones, is fraught with difficulty. The problem is that your company and the company you want to emulate are different companies. And when you try to transplant best practice, it can often be rejected, just like an organ transplant. In my research, which focuses on how life science firms evolve, I've uncovered 3 causes of failure to assimilate best practice. This leads to 3 important practical lessons that I'll cover today. Consider the example of a research-driven primary care pharmaceutical company trying to adopt a new business model. This company is experiencing intense competitive pressures on its current model from both innovative competitors and generics. So the firm looks around and it sees another company in a similar sort of market, and that company is being successful with a service-led business model. That exemplar company creates most of its value and its competitive advantage beyond the pill. And our company thinks it would like to emulate that service-led business model of that very successful exemplar. But it fails. For reasons it doesn't fully understand, its attempts at value beyond the pill don't seem to impress its customers. The new model adds extra costs because of the new added value services, and those extra costs don't achieve the intended return on investment. As a result, competitive pressure intensifies and the results do not improve. Now, there are many possible explanations for this failure, which has been repeated by a number of life science companies. But the obvious explanations, such as incompetence or underinvestment, are not supported by the facts. In this case, the emulator company saw the visible aspects of the exemplar firm's business model, high levels of service, and imitated those very well. In fact, the reason for the failure was a matter of semantics. The leader of our firm had too narrow a definition of the term business model. It's a fashionable phrase, but it's actually an umbrella term that includes strategy, structure, monetization methods, and all those sorts of other things. But if this firm's leaders thought business model meant only the value-added services part of the value proposition, and they didn't think about the other things that are included in the business model, as a result, they failed to target those market segments that would pay for service. They failed to structure themselves to support service delivery, and they neglected to find a way to create revenue from service. All of this because of the way that they defined the term business model. This failure, and others like it, would have been avoided if someone on the leadership team had asked a simple question. What exactly do we mean when we say business model? And how is it different from other related ideas like strategy? Amongst academics who are taught to question what words mean, this issue is known as the construct definition problem. In plain English, this gives us our first lesson about successful adoption of best practice. When you use a term, say exactly what you mean. For our second example, consider an in vitro diagnostics company that is classed as small to medium, but which, thanks to innovative and patented technology, is growing very rapidly. Faced with managing a larger business and flush with cash flow, the flourishing firm decides to invest in its strategic marketing capabilities. It picks a consultancy and commissions a marketing excellence program. It's expensive, but the consultancy can claim honestly that its strategic marketing planning process is best practice because it's based on one of the most successful large firms in the same industry. Again, the transplant fails. The new process is much more laborious than the one it's replaced. It absorbs a lot of time and effort, but it doesn't produce a significantly better output. The marketing department now produces lots of splendid looking professional presentations, and there's lots of new jargon. But there's no real world impact, and the new jargon and process creates divisions between marketing and some of their colleagues in medical affairs, sales and other departments. Why was this a failure? was so successful within the firm? Well, in this case, we can also rule out the obvious explanations. The programme was well supported by senior leadership, there was very generous investment of time and money, and the consultancy we used was world famous. Yet the project was an expensive failure in both direct costs and indirect opportunity costs. This failure can be explained. You see, the strategic marketing planning process miscarried not despite of its origins in a successful big company, but because of those origins. The chief marketing officer assumed that what works in one diagnostic company would work in another. This ignored the reality, however, that every firm is different from every other. In this case, the main difference lay in the nature of the markets that the strategic marketing planning process was trying to address. The large exemplar firm operated across several related but very different sub-markets within the IVD sector. And each of those markets, being quite mature, had segmented into numerous different customer types. As a consequence, the exemplar firm needed and had developed a very complex and sophisticated strategic marketing planning process that exactly matched its needs. By contrast, our emulator firm was tightly focused on one sub-market of the in vitro diagnostics sector, and that market, being relatively immature, was relatively homogeneous and relatively unsegmented. Now, although this complex imported process could be applied to the simpler situation, it wasn't needed. It was like buying a Ferrari to do the school run. It looked great, but it was extravagant and it was unnecessary. This failure could have been avoided if the chief marketing officer had asked just one question. Is the success in one context likely to happen in another context? This is what my academic colleagues call the test of external validity. And it should have made the company pause before signing a large cheque for the consultants. They would have been better off actually to adopt best practice from a smaller, simpler market. So this gives us our second lesson for adopting best practice. When you import ideas from one context to another, respect the differences. Our third example is of a specialty pharmaceutical company that wants to become patient-centric. The firm has many good reasons for this. Being customer-oriented is what we're all taught at business school. Customer centricity fits well into the mission statement. And if we're honest with ourselves, the firm's leaders are also influenced by the fashion for patient centricity that is sweeping the pharmaceutical industry. After all, as that chief marketing officer said to me, what are we centred on if not the patient? In this case, failure was slower and less visible, but it was still a failure. In the market, relationships with important key opinion leaders eroded. At the same time, payers complained that the firm's commercial leaders were not listening to their needs. And it was noticeable that the firm's value proposition in the market became blurred and diffuse. Internally, communications within brand teams between marketing and some other more technical functions, such as market access and regulatory affairs, became strained. More importantly, team cohesion eroded, and even the term patient-centric came to have negative connotations. So why did such a good idea go wrong? Obviously, patients' needs are important, and obviously they should drive what the company does. And the company had followed through with its goals, its metrics, its strategy and its tactics. How could that be wrong? Well, in this case, it took the arrival of a new leader to see the problem. She had a favourite phrase that she used often: what works is what fits. And when I asked her what she meant, she said that every initiative, process or strategy had to align to two things. First, the market's needs. Secondly, the firm's own culture. In this case, patient centricity was not aligned to either the market or the firm's culture. The patient was important, of course, but success in this market depended mostly on meeting the needs of the specialist physicians and the payers. Internally, the company had a culture, which it had embedded over decades, of scientific excellence. That culture struggled with nebulous ideas such as patient experience and non-clinical benefits. Patient centricity does work in other contexts, of course, but in this firm it was misaligned both to the culture and to the market. In this case, failure would have been avoided had the new leader arrived earlier, and ask that question about what works is what fits. Academics call her idea the bicongruence hypothesis. It's the third lesson of best practice adoption. What works is what fits. So we can sum up these examples and the academic research behind them as 3 critical lessons. Adopting best practice is a good idea, especially in fast-moving markets like pharma and medtech. But best practice is only valuable if it's chosen well and is assimilated thoroughly. If it isn't, it's a very costly mistake. Firms who are good at assimilating best practice have learned these 3 critical lessons. And these 3 lessons are also supported by decades of academic research. If you'd like to know more about that, then please get in touch with me.